Starting in 1 minute, is that okay? This will be concurrent session 3, Governor Yukon, Performance Measurement and Evaluation Framework, Centering Integration and Concision in Performance System Design. A really nice segue from our last presentation because it deals with the intersection of complexity and communication, etc. So we'll just give it 1 minute and then we'll start our presentation, okay? All right, folks, I've got it at 1 minute, 11:34, and we want to give this enough time to really have some consideration of some of the really important, again, future fit information, much as per our theme in this conference. My guest is one of our farthest traveled people today, so we'll be kind, Stephanie, because it's I don't know what time it is in Yukon, but it's
still caffeinated.
Yeah, that's right. It's still early morning, so thank you so much for making this trek. Stephanie Hawkins is the current Director of Evaluation with the Government of Yukon. She has multiple degrees in biology and other areas of environmental programs, as well as sort of Nature Conservancy and Toronto Regional Conservation Authority background, but is intrigued by what's most interesting to me is intrigued by the intersections of complexity, communications, and decision making, which again we heard about this morning in both of our previous presentations in this room. And she's been working with various groups in the Yukon and has built a strategic business planning and performance unit within the finance division. And it's designed to integrate, really, and looking at centralized planning and reporting. At the Government of Yukon, Stephanie and the evaluation unit team serve as corporate resources on matters of performance measurement, evaluation, and strategic alignment. So again, that integration theme is going to be really important for us today. Perhaps available more quickly in a smaller government situation, but something we've been talking about needing, I think, at PPX for a long time. So this performance measurement and evaluation framework, including a design and build of its accompanying data platform, which you'll hear a bit about today, is designed to integrate results information, integrated results information system, an IRIS, I'll call it. And it's the current focus of her work, and you'll hear more about it in a second.
Okay.
Stephanie.
Great, thank you. Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. Very excited to be here, and also very excited to be talking about what we've been doing lately at the Government of Yukon and with our new performance measurement and evaluation framework. This morning I'll talk a little bit about where the framework came from, but mostly be talking about what we're doing. So what is our approach? How are we working through this with our internal clients? What are the products that we've developed and are delivering to help support the objectives of the framework? And finally, a bit of wrap-up summary. So, in terms of background, I'm going to use 2 acronyms. I'm hoping to stick to 2. One will be KPI, which I think should be fine in this room, and the second is PMEF, for the Performance Measurement and Evaluation Framework. So if you hear me say PMEF, that's what I'm referring to. So, context. In 2021 and 2023, Department of Finance in their mandate letter commitments had an evaluation policy or an evaluation framework. And so our experience with our internal clients, as well as the experience that others have had with clients doing the evaluation piece, is that we're finding that going into work with our clients, preparing for their evaluation, they were really struggling with outputs, but particularly those outcomes that were most proximal or most directly influenced by their own activity, which was compromising the ability, of their capacity to answer the evaluation questions that they would most want their evaluation to answer. So knowing that, and also being given this mandate of budget strategy integration, which really has a very high degree of overlap with results-based management. We don't use the results-based management terminology of the Government of Yukon, but it incorporates the same piece. Essentially, we're like, oh, okay, what do we want? What do we want out of our framework? And what we want is deep integration to address this complexity issue, the ability to identify co-benefits. When you're setting up a program, you don't want to have to align it to environment or to reconciliation. You ideally want it to pursue both, and you want to be able to identify that it's pursuing both. To apply those multiple priority lenses, so reconciliation, gender and diversity, climate, well-being or quality of life, and for those to be integrated across government, to nest the logic, so we're building one sort of coherent whole of government logic, and in doing so to de-silo the actions that government is undertaking in different departments and also with their partners. And finally, to integrate documented priorities. If we wrote a report, an action plan, and said, we want this, how do we use the information or the data that we're collecting to be like, what did we do? What money did we spend? What results were achieved? And to be able to pull that data easily. Also, we want the obvious interpretation. Navigating the data, particularly with complexity, is a big one, but we also wanted, given that issue with, again, the outcomes most proximal to the activities that we've undertaken, is to very clearly illustrate where there's data, great, but where there's not data. Where are we heading into a program that we can say at the outset, in 5 years, you've not identified a single thing that's within the influence of your program that you are currently measuring? How can we make that very, very clear to everyone if that's the case going in? So this is the option that we had for an evaluation framework. This has been taken by others, which is something gets approved, it goes through cabinet or for us management board, and then if it meets a certain set of criteria, we start a clock. We say in 5 years we're going to do an evaluation. At the time of the evaluation, the work that for the evaluation gets done, the logic, the evaluation metric, evaluability assessment, et cetera, and then you do the evaluation. At which point, if you don't have those data that you need to have been collecting for the last 5, 10 years, you do not have them, you will either recreate them with great expense and probably inaccuracy in a retroactive way, or you will not be able to use the data that you hope to have to answer the questions you wanted. So what we've done instead is said, okay, you've got approval, you're going to start a thing. We are going to come in and sit with you and develop and document your logic, which can help you, and we produce templates and supports for this as well, to do your evaluation metric and your valuability assessment at the outset, which means that we don't tell you that you ever need to do an evaluation, but when you go to do an evaluation, you will have that information. You will know what we will know, what data you've been collecting, and you'll know what kinds of answers or what types of outcomes those are going to speak to or are not going to speak to. In the meantime, as the central agency evaluation unit, we're going to take that information and we're going to integrate it with the other logics that we've seen from other places across government so that we're ultimately, collectively, and sort of in an aggregative approach, stitching together the logic of government for government. We'll take the data, great. When you do your evaluation, you'll have access to all of that, great. But in the meantime, that integrated model that we've built and the data that are collected and aggregating to it will provide us corporate perspective and will give our management board and cabinet analysts the opportunity when they do analysis and are looking to support decisions or senior decision making, that entire repository of data will be available to them. So, who are our audiences for this? We have the analysis and decision support. Those, again, are analysts, senior decision makers, what is known, what will be knowable or is knowable, and then what the operational context is within sort of like the de-siloed. Is a department looking at something here that really deeply integrates with something another department is doing? How are those things converging? How are the investments looking? As well as strategic alignment and financial flows thereof. In the meantime, we want to provide products back to our actual managers, our program managers, our directors. I'm not sure if other central agencies have a habit of being deemed a black hole where templates get completed and go to die, but we're aware of this reputation. We're looking to provide products back to our directors saying, hey, this is what you know. This is on an annual basis what your results are looking like, what your investments are looking like. These are all of the different priorities that align with what you're doing. Even some of them, if you didn't know that they weren't a priority for you and you didn't know to align them, because we've integrated, you can see them. So we do that for their own management purposes, but also so they have that collected information when they go to do another proposal or request or tell the narrative about what their program is, what it does, that they have that in hand. So we'll look at some of those products. Finally, I'll note importantly, we do not have direction for this to be a public-facing reporting exercise. So what we've been able to do is to say, what do we need to build up from the ground up, and again, that sort of aggregating manner, that supports management and decision-making without being told, you know, like, you need KPIs for every department in 6 months or 2 years, like, go get that ready. So we do have a little bit of more operating room than some others because we don't have that expectation that this is going to be public-facing and get it done by a certain date. So, design challenges. What we call the beast is the complexity. How do we take data complexity and visualize it, navigate it, so that we can make use of it, that we don't get lost in it? Convention, conflation, and some of the terminology that's commonly used in evaluation of results-based management, we had to tease some of that out. Structure and formatting of logic models, made some changes there. Text, the tyranny of text. So many words in our strategic plans, in our mandate letters, in our actions plans. How do we manage the text that's articulated in what we're saying that we want to do? Priorities, they change. Governments change. Plans change. How do we not lose the work that we've done when the wording or the direction of something changes? And finally, that culture and capacity piece. How do we manage across government to sort of build momentum and enthusiasm for doing this work? So, what are we doing? Some of the design foundations. First, Henry Mintzberg, McGill, management scholar, gives us some of this language. Intended strategy, what we say. This is what's the content of those mandates letters, of those strategic plans. Emergent strategy, what do we actually do? Strategic alignment, what is the delta between those things? How is what we're saying, what we want, matching up with what we're actually doing? And there's sort of like a pretty basic concept here, which is that if we take, you know, humanity, we have everything we've got, and we've got everything we want. And strategy is essentially how we choose to fill that gap. What do we allocate? What do we do? What do we expect? So we can also think of strategy a little bit like a resource logic model, which includes, to the exclusion of what we do not do, expect or allocate. So one of the common complaints that we hear from departments, or not departments, but usually managers who are delivering a program that's been operating for a very long time, is like, we don't see ourselves articulated in strategy. Well, no, you're there. It just may have been a very long time since someone spoke about what the strategy that you're pursuing is, because everyone at this point still takes it for granted, but you're using those resources to do something, so you are inherently integrated into the strategy of government. Which gets us to the logic model, and you'll see, and I'll explain, we've made some changes here, but again, using those navigational poles, you know, everything we've got, everything we want. We have our organizations, we have our departments, we have our actions. There we're going basically one to many, one to many, one to many. Cool. Then things get really busy in the middle with complexity. And I'll speak to that in just a moment. I'll note here, though, after activities, you do not see outputs, because we have relegated outputs to a type of measure that you can associate with an activity. It does not need to be the intermediary between the activity and the outcome. Sometimes it matters. If it does, fantastic, put it there. Often it doesn't. This is some of the most awful contortions of logic by very bright people are performed trying to fill this box, and that's where we get metrics like number of meetings held, right? If it doesn't matter, don't put it in. You can put it in with your activities. Next thing that you'll see is how we've zoned the outcomes. We've gotten rid of the horrible conflation in how we refer to outcomes, where we bind it up with a time-based expectation. So sometimes we have immediate outcomes followed by intermediate. Intermediate's not so bad. Sometimes we have short and midterm. And that doesn't have anything really to do about how long that thing will take. Simple things can be hard. They can take a long time. And so what we've done instead is, cool, that's in your targets. You know, if you want to include that actionable, that time-bound element, or set an expectation of when something's going to be done, that's in your target. If your target includes those items, it's an interim target. Your final target is always where you want to be, Easiest one for this, injuries. Final target, always 0. Interim target, it might be 4. If it's 11:59, the day before the end of fiscal, and you've only got 3 injuries, are you going to go kneecap someone? No, you're not. But you are going to be ultimately aiming toward that final target. What that allows us to do with our outcomes is to restructure them into what we call our zones. And so zone 1, plausible attribution. You're pretty sure that your thing is the thing that caused the change. Zone 2, detectable change, basically observable contribution. In zone 2, maybe a client has agency to make their own decision, maybe there are other drivers that you can control, but you're pretty sure the signal from your program is going to be detectable through the noise of those other factors, and you're going to be able to sort of say, we influence this. Zone 4, skipping to zone 4, these are standardized across government, so we have common basically reference points. They speak to the things that we want out of government and out of society. Zone 3, everything in between. You don't expect to be able to detect a change in what you've done to that outcome or the measure indicator associated with it, but you're pretty confident that you're making a contribution. And where we focus people is in here, what we call the realm of reality, right? Where does a dollar turn from an abstract fungible resource into something concrete, into a pamphlet, into an hour, into something, and then where do you lose the signal on being able to detect what that thing has done? If you don't have anything in there, you don't have anything, right, in terms of evaluating what your program is. One of the things that's again, what we hear from client groups is they're often writing for out here, right? What the very high-level outcomes that people speak to and speaking notes and are told, not to get into the weeds. We need to create space for both of those, and we need to create the interlinkages between them. And finally, get here, I'm so excited that you used the word fractal. I was giving the test presentation, and they were like, take out the word fractal. No, everyone's going to focus on what does fractal mean and why are you using it? I was like, okay.
We geeks stick together, yeah?
Yeah. Is that between these navigational pools, the shape of the information, the strategy has a shape, right? It basically goes from here are narrow things, they split up, a lot of complexity in the middle, but we can navigate between those, and the shape is, regardless of what scale you're looking at it, thank you, fractal, it looks more or less the same. So, how did we use that information in what we do with our clients, or that approach? So the first thing we do, we sit down, someone gets, their management approval, yay, we get a note that says, hey, so-and-so is now off to the races with this program. We call them up, we're like, you've been screened in, we're going to come talk to you, you're going to do a bunch of facilitated sessions with us, it's going to be fun. And it is. By the time we're through, the first 45 minutes, people who hated it are kind of on board, and people who are neutral say the words, this is fun, without prompting. So, I'm not lying, it happens. Okay, so we come into these sessions with some things in our pocket. Again, we've got our polls, all the resources, all of our aspirations, everything we want. We've got our organization where we're operating. We've got our chart of accounts, so we've got the financial structure, and we've also got the documents that have been produced, mandate letters, strategic plans, action plans. And what we do with those documents, very curious about the AI piece, as previously mentioned, is we slice and dice them. We have written software that says, this is your document, it separates out every element of that document, and it reconstructs in a hierarchical structure. So we can link to specific elements in the document and know what those are contributing to. The other thing that we do is we take every item in the document and say, is this something that is relevant? Is it a measure or indicator? Is it a target or threshold? Is it an outcome? Is it an activity? And we code it. And sometimes the same sentence will contain easily 2, sometimes 3 of those those different items, just embodied in the way that it's written. And then that allows us to sort of link like with like. So we can link activities in the real world to an activity that was stated that we want somewhere. And then we sit down with our clients and we say, hey, what's your logic? We plot out the activities, and we make the connections between our different zones of outcome. So what do you have? You know, what are you doing? And this is a very back and forth dialogue. Where does it come from? What does that lead to? How did you get there? What contributes to that? Is there something bigger that contributes to? And we build this model and make those connections. So that's usually session 1. About an hour session, you've got a basic model on the page for revision and editing. And then we say, hey, and I know you can't read the words here, I'm sorry, but what are measures or indicators? So for those activities, what do we want? If these states are true, and we have a very rigorous syntax for how we write activity statements and outcome statements, if the states of the outcome are true, what would that look like, right? And that gives us our measures or indicators. And if we see something like this, where we're like, we've got some output, you know, some activity-based measures, maybe they're outputs, maybe they're something else, and we've got some measures and indicators only in zone 3 or 4, like, you're not going to know anything. You're never going to be able to tell a story with this data about what your program accomplishes. So maybe do you want to try to like put something into those, find something that speaks to something where you'll be able to detect what your effect is. And this is the first product. So we're producing what we call impact profiles. It's very similar. I feel like everyone has their own version of the logic model. This is ours. We have those stratified zones, so plausible attribution right here. Oh, that's a bit jerky. Observable contribution, contribution, abstract, ideal. So even if you can't read the words, you can look at this model and know, in this scenario, it's a housing program. We're giving people money to build some green houses. Totally all the data is fake. And then we talk about housing outcomes, housing affordability, housing accessibility, etc. From a housing perspective, we know that we don't know anything here, but we've identified what we've got, and we've also identified any of those that have a measure indicator, as indicated by the circle around it, what that measure indicator is, which direction we want it to go, any information we have, targets and thresholds, criteria, previous current value. So we hand that back and we say, here you go. This is your phase 1 product. And in doing that, we've got 9 of these for what we call the key concepts, which are one-page handouts. It's like, this is how we're doing it. We've got another 10 for evaluation, as well as online training courses for both of those. So we've built this. We are at times a unit of 1, sometimes 2, very occasionally 3, for the entire government. So building scalable resources for those sort of not where we don't need the super high-touch support, we try to do that because we are a time-limited resource. But this is some of the culture capacity building that we've also done over the last 2 years to make sure that people aren't left alone kind of wondering what are we talking about? What do they mean by that? So phase 1, sessions 1 and 2. After that, we say, okay, for each and any of these, is there a priority lens that could be applied and why? Is there a reconciliation lens? Is there a gender diversity lens? Is there a climate lens, a quality of life or well-being lens? Or do you have a link to those documents, those and their elements, an external framework? So if, for example, we're pursuing something that advances a federal framework, we can make a linkage to that. What we call the commitments and aspirations of government, strategic plans, mandate letters, action plans, anything that comes out from our own shop or government saying, what do we want? As well as anything that relates to ongoing policy. We make those connections. We provide back this second product. So it might be a little bit hard to see, but we have the flags that speak to where are we seeing those different lenses applied in our logic, as well as if we made references to documents, what are all of the things? So in this one, we've got some related to housing accessibility. So there's items related to housing accessibility in our murdered and missing Indigenous women and Two-Spirited Plus strategy, as well as the metrics, some of the metrics associated in our index of well-being work. So we can place those flags and say, this is what you're contributing to. If anyone asks you what your program is contributing to that's a government priority, this is your page. This is a second model. This is a hypothetical set of climate programs. We've got some, marketing for some solar panel rebates. We've got the funding of the green housing. We've got some funding of industrial housing and a couple other things. But we can see here lots of climate flags. This is what we would expect. It's a climate strategy. What we do in these is say, are we seeing flags missing? Are we not seeing any flags associated with some of the priority lenses that we might expect to see show up? And you can do a very quick scan on that based on the colors that we've assigned. And again, the items here would be related to our climate strategy. So which elements are linking? After that, we look at budget. What are the dollar values associated with each of the activities? If we're looking forward, what are you asking for? If we're looking backward, do you have year-over-year data? And for each of the items, what are your states? So we get basically for each node a model that looks like this. On the left-hand side, what has the budget change been? On the right-hand side, what is the most recently observed state? What was the most recently observed direction of change? Very tiny in the bottom here. We've also created a visualization for forward-facing asks that says, within different time brackets, a year, 1 to 3 years, or 1 to 4 years, over 4 years, when do you expect to see the change materialize? A couple of things here, setting expectation for decision makers. So if something comes back in 2 years and they're like, where's your change? It's like, well, we told you. We weren't expecting to see a change probably for 4 years. Also, so we don't go pursuing evaluation before we expect to even reasonably, have observed that. So we're not sort of saying, everybody does evaluation in 3 years. Well, if you're not expecting change until 7 years, don't ask for an evaluation for 3 years unless it's an evaluation for something that's not that. And then we take it. We take that information, central agency, bring it in, and stitch it together for the commonalities that we see of what's going on in other departments. Where are we pursuing the same objectives, these same higher level objectives that are common across government and departments? And that produces our final product. So here we can see we combined the two models. We've got our climate flags in there. We've got our gender and our reconciliation and our well-being flags. We're seeing that we've got our references to both those documents, to climate, to well-being. And then we produce this diagram, which is basically how does the money cascade through the system. So we can see we made an investment here, we cut some money here, and by the time you get to something like climate, we're actually at a net negative, even though we might feel very pleased about our investment in these residential greenhouses. And at overall sort of life well-being, we're still in net negative. And if you want to follow the dollar values, you can follow the dollar values. A direct investment is something made in an activity or something that an outcome that an activity is directly, it's that primary connection. Or we can watch it cascade cumulative through the system. Now, what we're seeing here is that this model really begins to break down in terms of comprehensibility. We have limited at 26 nodes, which is the number of letters in the alphabet. And really, any time we get above 20, we begin to lose the plot. So this is sort of the very micro to meso product, but not appropriate for that whole of government macro product. Before I get to that and a couple other items, I'll note that we've also created the capacity in how we identify, how we use the identification within our data structure to incorporate the perspectives of other organizations that are not our own. So if we are pursuing something with another order of government, with an NGO, they can plot what their understanding of what they're doing and how it works, and we reach at sort of some common points. We don't have to agree necessarily or be pursuing the same thing at those lower orders, but we can document and hold that information to give us support in looking for gaps and redundancies. So if this is what you're doing, and this is what we're doing, and this is what the third organization is doing, does it make sense? Does it make sense together? Is there something that we're missing? I'll note here that this is not sort of incompatible with KPI or scorecard or dashboard reports as we see them, right? We can just take subsets of these data and say, at the program level, this is our KPI. At our department level, this is our KPI. Organization level, KPIs. But what we're really doing, and I like the language used in the previous presentation, is being like, when you say key, you've applied that. What exactly do you mean by key? And if the answer is we've applied a subset, we've basically taken the indicator, it's the most representative, it tells the best story, But we've got lots of other indicators behind it. Then cool, that's a robust key performance indicator. And I think there's a note in the Ontario report in the opening remarks, where it's asked, is it working? If it's working, great. But then the second part of that statement is, if it's not working, why isn't it working, right? And if we're here, and we've got our standalone KPI, and that's all we've got, what we call the bouncing ball of efficacy is you have nowhere to go. There is no where did we see things stop working? You just know that they're not. So that's something that we really try to emphasize. KPI gets dropped with sort of a lot of authority. It's we have KPIs. It's tell me about those KPIs. Tell me what else you have that are just PIs that you're not mentioning because you haven't assigned the K to them. Okay, organization scale. This is where things get really fun. Before I proceed, is there any maybe quick questions about, quick nod?
One of the things I really like about what you've got conceptually, Stephanie, is for those in the federal government, you may have recognized that they are asking about what is in your sphere of influence versus outside or direct influence. And so I'm reading your zone 1, zone 2, zone 3 as in a way, a more directed way to get at that. It also makes a nice reference in some ways to the idea of attribution versus contribution, which is almost a uniquely Canadian invention from John Main, the late great John Main, who we gave a Lifetime Achievement Award to 10 years ago at PPX, former PPX board member, and sort of world-renowned thinker on this, the idea that once you get to a certain level of complexity, you can't show full attribution. You can make a case for contribution, and you nicely said that, plausible case for contribution. So I think getting people to think about that is really, really important to me, and I hadn't seen that earlier. I hadn't realized that that's what you're doing, so I think that's really, really important. Yeah, so the structure is very meaningful, and that, of course, leads to this last point you made, whereas if the KPI is out at the end, and Bonnie said this morning, right? LTC, long-term care homes, you've got a sort of a death rate that is a pretty morbid way of looking at it, but its finality, it's probably out there in those zones, because who knows who's going into long-term care now. It's possible that people closer to death are going because people are afraid to go to long-term care homes in Ontario. So that death rate is not going to be meaningful. What would be meaningful is if these people are being appropriately supported. As she mentioned, some of the other indicators, which I would be reading as sort of your zone, sort of 1, 2, 3. So I think that's, this is not esoteric. This is really, really important that we get these zones right and tell the story. And I think Bonnie Lissick mentioned that. So yeah, thank you for that. That clarifies things for me.
Okay, thanks. Okay, logic integration. So, as noted, after we've sat down with the program director and their team, it's really one of the wonderful things about doing this work is watching program directors discuss this with their teams and to make those connections and be like, oh, we need to talking about this department. They are also pursuing that. And to watch them organically begin to articulate those connections and articulate what they do, which is very powerful, right? Because what we're essentially getting people to do is say, why is the work you're doing making a difference in the world? What is the so what? And people are often very detached. We're like, I do this. This is the thing I do. That they get a little bit removed from the so what, and to bring them back to that is a very positive, empowering experience in our, in the groups that we've spoken to. So we take their logic. This is what it is. This is our small model. But if we remove it, this could be across government hundreds to thousands of nodes. Generally, again, in this shape, working with our navigational poles, everything that we've got, everything that we want. And we can take any sort of subset of that, right? It can be by department, it can be by strategy, it could be by a keyword. We can take any subset of that. And we do what we call very technically the spinny wheel. We have tried to give it a more professional sounding name, and it has been vetoed by DMs and ADMs. So it is currently continuing to be known as spinny wheel. If you want to look it up on the internet, it is a zoomable sunburst diagram. And so I'll just stop sharing here on this one. So this is our banana pox mitigation initiative. One of the challenges, I'm not sure if anyone else who does this work, when you set up a hypothetical scenario, you need to set it up so hypothetical that no one can take it seriously enough to get upset or want to contribute to it. So in our banana pox scenario, we have this model. And what this model allows us to do is nest as many concentric rings as we want to display as many levels of the model as we want, and then to zoom in. So in this first layer, government's managing banana pox well. That can be about mitigating impact, or it can be about how the government actually manages its own banana pox response. This is the looking down only perspective. So this is looking, from whence did this come? So as we moved out to each concentric ring, we can look at what are the constituent parts of businesses and institutions? What are the constituent parts of individuals and families? So businesses and institutions, which ones? Industries and sectors. What industries and sectors? If we're looking at populations, what vulnerable populations? And work our way out through concentric, basically, rings, plotting every possible pathway to that thing. And some things have multiple pathways, which is why we're seeing the recurring patterns out there, all the way out to the different outcomes that the different activities that are contributing to them. I've taken out the financial data, but we'll see that it's there in just a second. But basically allows us to zoom in or out to the level of specificity in which we have an interest. So we can do that looking in one direction, which is what we've done here. We call it apex outcomes is where we start. What are the highest and how do we get down through all of our rings? Or we can start somewhere in the middle. So we can start at, in here, communities and individuals are intact and robust. So our view down is a little bit shorter because we started in the middle, but then we can also look up. We can look up to say, to what does this contribute, which can include, we haven't included here, including those linkages to the documents that we've stated, to those priorities. So we can say, this contributes to these things, as well as this is where we begin to see the intersections with the commitments that we've made publicly. Where we get a bit more fun is, we'll just go back to our apex outcomes and our resources. I'm just going to pause. I have made this once. I'm never making it again. We're in the process of our RFP negotiation right now for someone who does this for real to make this. So if this is a bit clunky, it's because I made it and it's a proof of concept, and it will be soon replaced by something made by people who do this. So we can look at our budget. So where did we invest our money, right? At which items saw direct investment? Which items and how does the investment cascade cumulatively through our system? But for current year investment, this is the most interesting one. Where did the most significant investments go? But we can also look at year-over-year differences. So if we had two different budgets, we can say, oh, okay, so we have some investments here, we have in here, we have some cuts here. If there are different departments who are doing this action, do they know that they're doing it? And particularly when we roll it up cumulatively across government, if we have Department A investing and we have Department B cutting, and we think we're making a pretty great contribution, it's like, yay, we made a huge contribution here. When we look at the cumulative investment and where we've cut dollars, we're still in a net negative for that. So it allows us to watch the effects of the budget decisions, or basically our resource investment, cascade across our different outcomes. And of course, we can filter this model so that it reflects any specific investment in which, or any specific strategic theme, any specific department, really anything that we want that's in our model, any strategic plan item, to say, what went into that? And how did that change? And is that coherent? And seeing something get cut, this doesn't tell you that this is absolutely the wrong decision for these higher order outcomes, but it should prompt the discussion. If we're still investing in this somewhere and we're cutting somewhere else, are we cutting because we didn't know? We didn't know that we we're collectively pursuing this, so we've cut off our part even though someone else who depends on that is investing? Or is it done? We don't need to do it anymore. Or is it that it wasn't working and so we're looking to invest in something else? So this doesn't give you the answer, but it gives one a way to look at the entire picture and be like, we're seeing some things here that probably warrant asking some questions. So that is the spinny wheel. It is our basically visualization tool for displaying and navigating through as many layers of complexity as we like. Let's just go back to. So this is just a quick review of what we noted. So we can start our all aspirations, navigational poll, and ask the question, what's everything that's contributed? Similarly, we can start with an account with a department and say, what is everything that this is contributing to? Or we can situate ourselves in the middle with one or a collection of outcomes and or activities that we have interest in and be like, where did it come from? Where is it going? And see both. So this is our basic model. This is where things get really fun. We have our base model, which we just saw, and then we add conditional formatting. So in our previous impact profile, that sort of stratified logic model, we saw those gaps in reasoning, those huge jumps by the space between the nodes. Here, if we do some color coding, if this is, a level 1, 2, we're like, okay, like zone 1, zone 2, this is in our attribution observable contribution. We have a reasonable path of outcomes here. Here we can see that this activity is jumping to something that will never be observed. So we know that from a sort of evaluation and ongoing measurement for the purposes of management and or decision-making function, we're not going to have any data of use there. Similarly, we can do presence-absence. One of these models has more climate flags. Is that a department? Do we see a department that's not really assigning gender or reconciliation or climate lenses to their work seriously? That becomes very apparent. Similarly, we can ask, do we have measures and indicators? Do those have data? Do they have criteria associated? And filter down and get a very simple perspective on what's there, what's not, what can we know as a government. Priority lenses applied, that's what we're looking at in this one. Those are two different models with climate flags applied, as well as document connections. How many items and at what level is a certain set of programming contributing to? Is it very rich in connection, or is it very removed? If it's very removed, is that intentional? Is it not intentional? It just, again, prompts a discussion item to be like, how can we use this information to think about what we're doing, and how can we do it at a whole of government scale so we're not stuck in our departmental silos? Similarly, we can watch for those directional changes. Is investment going up and down? Are results going up or down or in the direction that we want them to? And how are those investment or result effects cascading through our system or through our logic of how we think about from micro to macro? And then apply multiple, right? This is where it gets interesting, and when we put different filters, scenarios, with different formatting filters beside each other, we can see basically that budget strategy alignment. We can see how our investments are cascading and how those orient to what we've said are our strategic priorities into our investments sort of reflect a strategy. So here we have the direct investment scenario, which we talked about. So these are activities and or outcomes that are directly connected to an activity that have an investment in it. If you do incremental budgeting, your model is going to look like this, right? Everyone gets 2%. Everyone increases across the board. If you have a budget scenario that looks like this, again, this is where we have some investments, we have some cuts. Do those things make sense together? Is this basically a coherent set of investment decision, or is this decision making about investment made in silos, and maybe we could prompt a discussion to make sure that everything's cool there? This is what it looks like. If you, again, can assign different models, put them beside each other. If this was a hypothetical budget, Department A's a bit in the negative, it's making some investment. The budget looks a little bit better for Department B, even better for Department C. Similarly, it could be climate strategies. Investments, not so great for climate, better for housing, super great for training. And then the obvious extension is then we matrix them, right? We say, okay, we've got our budget scenarios, we've got our different priorities, our different strategic priorities. How are the different budgets hitting those different priorities? And ideally, budget A, a bit better for climate, budget B, a little bit better for housing. This is where we can prompt the question for co-benefits, right? We don't have a lot of money. As governments, we do not have a lot of money to solve the number and size of issues that, society, the public, are looking for government to make contributions or to deliver. So is this a moment where it can be is there a way to pursue more multiple benefits out of what we're doing so that that dollar can effectively stretch further? And we are getting deeply away from this program contributes to this strategy, this one to this one, never the two shall meet, in terms of being able to identify those multiple objectives. Data integration is kind of a little bit boring. Ongoing data collection is part of what we've built in. Annual reporting window, Q1 of each fiscal year. We'll be asking, in your current fiscal year that you're just beginning, do you have any changes to your logic or the documents that you've connected? What are your anticipated investments in your activities? How do you expect the measures or indicators within your realm of influence to respond? And we put this in Q1 because shortly after that is the strategic planning process. After that is the budget call. So if you're looking at something, you're like, we're putting this money in, we kind of hope that we're going to hold the line. That can be a conversation for strategy, which may cascade into, are we thinking that we might need to think about structuring our requests differently because we really want to see this move, or someone else really wants to see this move. As well as previous fiscal year, what are your observed measure indicator values? And then we take an inventory of what evaluation is occurring across government. Incorporating into the data, we've already sort of seen it's there, it's not, it has direction, it doesn't, and then we can use the spinny wheel to drill through to the data itself to be like, this is our trend line, we've had interim targets, we have a final target, we have criteria, our critical criteria, our ideal criteria, as well as drill through to information about those. Importantly, some of the information we're collecting can talk about the parameters of the fields associated with measure indicator data all day. Don't have time right now. But why are you collecting the data? We have fields for that. Is it for communication? You need to just give it to someone to report it. Are you using it for management, your own management? Are you using it for decision making? Or are you using it to maintain a data record? And how important are each of those functions? We often say, if you don't care about this data, no one else cares about this data, no one cares about this data. We don't care if you have 15 measures or indicators, if 14, no of them really cares about. You've just bulked up your number because someone at some point has told you that that's a desirable thing to do. So, closing thoughts. This is our model. This is what we're doing. We sit down with people. We do this integration. We provide the tools that do that corporate perspective and can support our decision making. Data, it's known what will be available for evaluation when evaluation time comes. Our design challenges, so we've tackled the complexity piece by developing these different visual products. We've tackled some of the conventions. We've taken at the outputs out of the logic model as sort of like an intermediating step. We've changed the logic model format, moved the words to the bottom, added the measures and indicators, restructured those zones so they speak to signal to noise ratio. Are you going to be able to detect an observable change based on what you have done, or is it just a contribution that you're not going to be able to really speak to? And created that stratification in the visual. We've measures indicators, moved that time piece into earned term versus final targets, and are very clear that those are not the same thing, and question the K and the KPI. In the text, and also added the ability to do the multi-party integration to pursue those sort of benefits of collective impact. On the document side, that text, we break up the documents, constituent parts, reconstruct them in a hierarchy, and assign labels to things in the documents that speak to things in the model. Very importantly, we keep that separate, right? Those are linkages. When that document changes, the linkages become archived, a new document comes on board, we create it to the model of how we understand the world works, that sort of massive model of logic that we're aggregating for the whole of government does not get trashed. Only the linkages get trashed, archived very professionally. Those get archived very professionally. A new document, a new priority comes on board. We reconnect, and if we need to add something to the model because something's not reflected, great, we will add that, but we keep the model basically apolitical. And finally, culture capacity, resources, very, very in-person, high-touch facilitation, lending hand, and just being really nice about it, right? Like, this is an exercise in supporting people to express what it is their program is bringing in terms of benefit. If we go in with sort of like a shaming, like, where are your KPIs? You don't have them, that shuts down the conversation really quickly. It needs to be a generative conversation. Finally, managing what matters. We've heard sort of, I think, every speaker speak to this today. Measurement isn't the point. Measurement is the tool to support management. And if you're not managing on the basis of information, it sort of begets the question, what are you using as the basis for your management? But that we really need to emphasize that using information is part of management, right? It is a fundamental function of managing. It is not an accessory bureaucratic red tape exercise. It is what we do. That is part of the function. Finally, thank you to our team and collaborators. These are some various folks who have moved through our team. Thank you very much to them for their patience and contributions to all of this as we work it out, as well as some important collaborators that we've had from across Yukon government. And finally, thank you. We're very early in this work. As I noted, we're just in the finishing up the contracting for the build of the system that will take it off of this laptop and into an enterprise system. So if anyone's interested in this work or wants to talk about it or has opinions about it, we'd love to hear it. It's a really great time for us to have those conversations, and we're always kind of very happy to have conversations that talk about, you know, how do we do this? So thank you.
So if anybody has any questions, please come on up. We have a few more minutes. I have a couple of questions. One is sort of very technical. What I love about Stephanie is that she's done her own coding and stuff. Like, she taught herself this software, and you said you're up to like 6 softwares or something?
Five or six languages.
So like, you know the details of how to do this. I really appreciate you for that, because you're not asking other people to do this, something that you haven't tried and you've put through. So my first question is, in the spinny wheel, because I already mentioned how I love the zones. I think the principles of this make so much sense. High engagement. You're getting people to feel more comfortable because they're going to talk about the stuff they directly influence versus indirect, and make that very clear, and I love that, and I think your language around that's very cool. The spinny wheel, as compared to, let's say, an Excel spreadsheet or series of Excel, two things about that. One, can you fit more data on? Is that why the wheel? Does that kind of cover what would be many Excel spreadsheet sheets? Would that be true?
Yeah, so what the wheel lets us do is it basically lets us visualize as many, using sort of logarithmic scaling. We can make each sort of circle smaller but still visible. So most of the network paths that we've seen, they usually don't extend beyond 20, right? Like, that might be like 8. By the time you add in the chart of accounts and some of the document structures, maybe you're up to 15, 20 layers. So you can see 15, 20 layers on the spinny wheel, and then you can make the cross linkages to all of those metadata about them, right? So like, does this have this? Is the data within this zone? And it gives just a very quick way to visualize that. By the time you get into like 100 nodes in a network structure, like the nodes and edges diagram, you're sunk. You can't really navigate it or make sense of it, and particularly you can't put it in front of anyone and ask them to, because they're just like, I don't know what I'm looking at. So the spinning wheel is just a way to condense that information really concisely.
So that's my second question. In a world that's very linear and boxy, you've gone to circles versus squares. And has there been a transition in people? Because, I mean, most of us, again, on our analytical Western society is all typically very squares. Put things in a matrix, do the box, Excel spreadsheet. You've got this in a circular fashion. Is it hard to sort of get people onto what that means or how to interpret, or what have you found in terms of that journey of discovery of showing that kind of information to people? How do you get them into it a little bit?
We found that people love something that spins, is what we've learned. We were showing this to a steering committee, and we're like, here's the network diagram, but here it is as the visual, like that spins, and you click this, and you get closer and closer to something that's tangible, or you get farther and farther. And they were like, lead with that. Like, people love the wheel, they love the spinning, they love the ability to zoom in or out on their item of interest. But speaking of the Western views, that's one of the reasons that we've incorporated, Yukon has 14 First Nations, and we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to collect different perspectives and different worldviews without saying that, like, this needs to be ours. We can have different views, and we can hold those at the same time, knowing that we're pursuing common objectives. And that was one of the big drivers for including that sort of multi-organizational perspective, or that way to sort of capture information that might be like, this isn't like what government has signed off on how we understand that works, but we understand that we're working with a partner, and this is their perspective. And now when we sort of go to speak with them, if we've documented it, we're always sort of starting from this common understanding that we've built together.
Yeah, I was sort of alluding to that with the circular nature of some cultures in terms of that as a shape or form of thinking. Might work better. So who knows? I realize it's early days. We won't put you on the spot.
Yep.
But I do hope, I don't see any questions. I know where people are going to be keen for lunch. But Stephanie will be here, I think, for our today, tomorrow. And I hope we can stay in touch with you to see how this, again, future fit design effort, it's innovative. It's really coolly kind of gets at some of the complexity issues that we need to address. And we all wish you well and look forward, and again, appreciate all the distance you've traveled to be with us today. Thank you so much. And it is lunch, folks, and I believe then we start up again at, is it 1:30? 1:30. Thank you. Lunch is here.
Great. Thank you. Oh, no. Shit. That's why it has a protective case.